Robocop 2 is a 1990 release science fiction action film directed by Irving Kirschner.
Robo is still patrolling the streets, so it follows on from the first film, and OCP are still a big presence in the city. So there's a few things going on at the start of the film. The police are on strike. There's a new drug on the street called Nuke. The city is about to default on loans that OCP have given it. That's OCP's intention, is for them to default on these loans so they can take over the city. You know, they're still aiming to build Delta City with Robocop in the middle of it. So Robo wants to go after the guy that's making this new drug by the name of Cain. He's played by Tom Noonan. OCP are looking to not replace Robocop. They want to have another. They want to repeat it again. They want to have another Robocop, Robocop 2. We see a video of some failed experiments where they've taken ex-police officers and put their brains inside robotic suits, and it doesn't go very well. There's a doctor called Dr. Fax who's working on this, and she thinks actually we need somebody slightly different. The policemen aren't going to work because they're too, they're too proud, and Alex Murphy was a one-off. He was more concerned with his duty than anything else, and that's why it worked for him. She's basically prepared to do whatever it takes to get this robot up and running. As you can imagine, it doesn't go brilliantly. So yeah, it's just more, ultra-violence and satire, much like the first.
Yeah, so Robocop 2 is our final sequel of the month, but this one is my least favourite out of all the sequels that we've done.
Oh, right.
I'm such a fan of the original film, as you are too, yeah. It's such it's a masterpiece in my eyes. I was very young when I saw the original Robocop. It was a friend of mine showed it to me, and I was probably way too young for it. But out of all the films that came out of the late 80s, that was one of the most violent. It was so visceral and so vicious and just so memorable, and I just loved it. And I only saw it once, and then I didn't see it for quite a long time. I don't know how he had it. Because we were young. I was very young when I saw it. It just left a mark on me. Good or bad, I don't know. But then when I saw this one, of course, I was very excited to see the sequel. And I thought, I saw this much later. And I just thought, I just felt so let down by it. It follows on okay from the original one. And I think what Irving Kirschner has at least done is it's got the same satire, it's got the same tone, it feels like the first one. But that's kind of, for me, where it ends. It doesn't do anything that the first one didn't do. It does, and the first one, everything this one does, the first one did, like, leaps better. This should have been better, in my opinion. That's how I feel about this one, unfortunately.
I mean, I was going to say that I thought it was the best of all the sequels that we've done, but so complete opposite. I mean, the one thing this is lacking over the original is humour. Well, there's a few jokes, and obviously the satire's in there. It's not quite as tongue-in-cheek as the original is. Obviously it is ultra-violent, but there's definitely some dark humour running all the way through, whereas this one, not so much. And I think a lot of people say it's more mean-spirited. I mean, obviously I don't think that's helped by the fact that one of Cain's henchmen is a boy. He's like, I don't know, a 12-year-old boy. He's shooting people and doing drug deals and things, which, obviously makes people uncomfortable seeing this sort of thing. I mean, it did have a bit of a troubled route to the screen. I mean, Orion were really struggling financially. They'd had a series of flops, so they really needed a big hit to sort of balance the books. So they demanded a sequel from the original writers. They came up with something, I think it was called Corporate Wars. And it was very strange. It basically, Alex Murphy falls in love with, like, a female police officer has sort of had her mind uploaded into a computer or into Robocop himself. I can't remember, but they fall in love, these two sort of disembodied brains. So, yeah, the studio were like, no, this is unfilmable. This is not going to work. So that didn't happen. Then they brought Frank Miller on board. The issue was there was a writer's strike at the time. And they really wanted to get this into production as quick. They were setting dates and all sorts, and they really needed to get going on it. So they brought Frank Miller in. Obviously, he's a comic book writer, so he wasn't affected by the writer's strike. And he gave it a good crack. He was, he's a big fan of the original film. A lot of the elements that he brought in are still in there. But again, it wasn't quite what the studio wanted. It was a bit much. And again, they then got more writers in to rewrite it. There was various directors attached as well. Verhoeven was interested in the first draft, this corporate wars thing. Once that was changed, then obviously he wasn't interested anymore, and he went off to make Total Recall anyway. And then Tim Hunter, who directed River's Edge, which we covered quite some time ago, was brought on board. Quite an interesting choice. He wanted to change Miller's script to a certain degree, and they didn't really see eye to eye on it. So he worked on it for a while, but eventually, I think he did. Again, he brought ideas in that are in the final film. Alex Cox was on board for about a week, but that quickly vanished. So, and then they were desperate to get somebody. Irving Kirschner obviously directed arguably one of the best sequels ever, Empire Strikes Back. So they gave him a call, and he read Miller's script and was on board. The script continued to evolve. Even during filming, while they had rewrites done by somebody else, Miller was there on set making changes all the time as well, and he even cameos in the film. So it did have a difficult path to the screen, and a bit like anything where the original makes lots of money and is a surprise hit, like we said with Blair Witch. It's stuff that's rushed to the screen is never good. Speed 2 wasn't rushed to the screen, but again, it was the studio wanted a sequel, whatever, because the first one made so much money. So, and in this case, obviously Orion were just needed cash, so they wanted something that was familiar, people would want to see. And I think even while filming, I think Nancy Allen, her role originally was much larger. I think when Tim Hunter was involved, he said he would give her equal billing with Peter Weller, and there was going to be like a love story between Lewis and Robocop. But again, that got left by the wayside, and her part got smaller and smaller until she's in the film, but not to the degree that she's in the first one. On the extras I was watching, there was an interview with her where at one point she was even thinking about quitting. So it wasn't a great experience for her. No, it's not on a par with the original, but it's got some great stuff in there. Tom Noonan makes a great villain. Probably not as good as Clarence Bodicker, but they're very different, because obviously Bodicker is just nasty constantly and horrible and awful, just a despicable human being, whereas Tom Noonan is a bit more subtle with his sort of, he's just as horrible and mean, but it's a lot more under the surface, shall we say. He's not menacing outwardly, perhaps. He looks like a bit of, he's kind of a hippie, so he looks a lot less threatening, but obviously under the surface he's still a vicious drug lord who will kill anyone to get his own way.
To go back to what you were saying at the beginning about the humour, I kind of disagree. I think there is humour in this film. I just don't think it's very funny. I think, and it's also what it does, and then maybe that's why I don't like it. I think it's a bit disjointed. It jumps around the place. There is humour there, but what it does is it's not the clever, witty, the kind of the acerbic wit of the original. That the satire is there certainly, and obviously they do put in the adverts and those things are in there, kind of all over the film. There's this whole sequence later on in the film with this where he rides the motorbike, and there's a bit in there which to me the humour reminds me of in Superman 2, Richard Lester comes on board and kind of chucks in his weird kind of slapstick humour, which I kind of went with, but a lot of people didn't like. Which you kind of get in this. There's a scene where Robocop is like pushed to the ground, and then the motorbikes ride over him, which is kind of like an odd slapstick sight gag moment, which doesn't really fit.
And then he hits a lamppost, doesn't he? And there's like a cartoonish clang noise.
You're right about Nancy Allen. She's completely put on the back foot. She's hardly there at all. To be honest, neither is Peter Weller. Or Tom Noonan. They're all kind of. Tom Noonan's. He doesn't do a lot, and then the only reason he's kind of there is to then become Cain as Robocop 2, the machine. But even, that's what's great about the first one is those, the personal dialogues. There's some great moments between Nancy Allen and Peter Weller, both before he becomes Robocop and then later on in the movie. This one's quite interesting because this one begins with that personality element. When he's with there's the whole sequence with his wife, which is really good in this. That's one good thing in this film, which does work and is good. I think I love that relationship, that bit at the beginning, but they throw that away. Yeah,
that's never mentioned again, is it? No.
Along from that is, I don't think all the criminals, all the villains in the original one are memorable. Every single one of them.
Yeah, yeah.
Even the character Joe, played by Jesse D. Goins. I mean, he's got that laugh. That laugh, just you remember that laugh. And of course, all the famous stuff where they kill Murphy off is just really good. I think all the characters in the first one are so memorable. I mean, in this film, you've got Dr. Fax, she's like a psychologist that comes along, and she's kind of Bob Morton's replacement. And she's no way. I mean, she's perfectly good. She's played by Brenda Bauer here. She's an Australian actress. He's a creep. He's really nasty. He's two-faced all the way through it. She is too, but she's just not. It's just not as interesting. I think everything, and I think that's the trouble with this one. It feels too much. I think what's interesting about Predator 2 is Predator 2 is trying to do something different. This one, not. It's just a retelling the original film in a slightly different way. Even the music's not as good, I mean, Basil Paul Doris isn't here, and you've got someone else, and the it's kind of familiar, but it's not that great score from the original film. It's a letdown, I'm afraid. Nowhere near as good as the original one. Better than the third one, for sure. And better than the remake. I just love the first one so much, and it's so I think what's really interesting. I mean, the first one is violent, and it's Paul Verhoeven doing this really, it shows violence for what it is. That film, when Murphy is killed, there's that horrendous scene where he's being taken onto the helicopter, and it feels it's like you're watching a documentary. It's so visceral and so realistic, and there's like blood coming out and everything. You don't get that here. There's nothing like that in this film. There's no peril, there's no danger, it just feels like a throwaway popcorn action film to me, and I wanted something more. I think that was it. When I came to see this film, I wanted a follow-on from the original one. I wanted that amazing experience I had with the original one, and I did not get that here. I'm afraid.
You put me off it now.
No, you're more than welcome to enjoy it.
I mean, yeah, everything you're saying is right. It's not as good. You kind of have to go to it, with lowered expectations, shall we say?
There is certainly stuff in here that to be liked. There are moments in here which are perfectly fine. I mean, the fight between Robocop and Cain, although I do like how they call him Robocop 2, which is a nice nod to that's what the name of the sequel is. I think that's quite funny. Again, it's not a patch on the fight between Robocop and Ed 209, and again, it's kind of just a rehash of that fight scene. But I think the machine of Cain is fine, and again, I love the kind of rehash in this one of the scene where Ed 209 goes nuts, which is just so. I mean, God, how memorable is that? 20 seconds to comply. I mean, it was so memorable. There was this British rap group called Silver Bullet who wrote a number and a tune on their record called 20 Seconds to Comply, and I heard that. I bought the tape and just listened to it over and over again. That's how much of a geek I am, and how much I love that first film. But in here, it's quite fun. They do a similar thing where a couple of machines go nuts and shoot up the place. It's just a copy of the original one, but it's not. It doesn't. That whole boardroom scene where he's brought out, and it's just genius. It's just genius, which this film just doesn't do, unfortunately.
I mean, I think the major issue, like you said, it feels a little bit, it jumps around all over the place a bit, and that's going to be a side effect of a script and then another script, and then people making changes to that script, and then changes being made while the film's being made. So, and it was successful. It did make maybe not as much money as they were hoping, but it did make a profit, and obviously then spawned another sequel. And obviously in the meantime we've had TV series and a cartoon. There's still talk of Robocop 4 or reboot or whatever. I mean, Neil Blomkamp was involved at one point, and I think that would have been quite interesting. But I think he's dropped out now, so I don't know where we are with it. And I think there was talk of Peter Weller coming back. Who knows? I mean, that would be interesting to see, sort of rusty, old Robocop still clanking around. That would be quite cool.
Well, I guess, in a way, you could play on the fact that he's always losing his memory, and his memory's not quite as sharp, and if you took it as an old person, I'm sure there's some kind of satire I think you could go with there. Alzheimer's and robots and AI and all that kind of thing. I don't know, maybe there's an idea there somewhere. I mean, again, it's like I said before, and I won't keep rehashing it myself, but I just think that it's a rehash of the original one and not as interesting. But Peter Weller does Robocop. The way he moves is great, and he still moves like Robocop in this film. And the great, the gun in the leg. That's always cool to see. And I think it's fun to watch this just because Robocop's such a great character, and it's done so well. And that's what I will give it, is Irving Kirschner has certainly kept the tone of the original one. The streets are gritty. It has that, which I think is interesting, but then it just kind of it loses its way, and maybe that's his production hell that kind of just made the whole thing, for me anyway. I mean, I've read some interesting reviews. There's a lot of people that seem to quite like it and say it's quite underrated and it shouldn't have had the kind of the hatred that it got. I'm not in that camp. I guess I'm in the other camp, unfortunately.
I think it could have been, it definitely could have been better without a doubt, but it could have been a hell of a lot worse. Peter Weller's performance is great. The effects, there's lots of stop motion again, which is always fun to watch. His suit, in the original, obviously it's quite grey, although in some lights it looks a bit blue, but in this one it's more iridescent almost, and depending on what light it is, it's very blue, which works in some scenes. Some scenes it's a bit too bright, I felt, because it's supposed to be very gritty, but he's like, this shining beacon. And they obviously lit it, I think the lighting guy was told to light it like a car, basically. I don't know if I like the look of it as much as in the original, but it's still a great design. The suit is brilliant. And when we do see him with his helmet off, I still think that's an amazing bit of prosthetic, where obviously it's his face, and then they put prosthetics all over his head, and it looks like his face is stretched over this robotic shell, which if you look at the remake, they didn't even bother to make an effort with that. They just put a mask around his head. So it's like, I'm not convinced that is a cyborg. It's just a guy in a suit, which obviously both of them are just guys in suits, but one of them looks like it maybe isn't, and the other one looks like it definitely is. And even the movement in the remake, there's no real... I mean, I've only seen it the once, I can't remember much, but it definitely, when Peter Weller moves, he looks like a robot, whereas in the remake, he runs and all sorts of stuff, and he just looks like a normal guy running.
Robocop in the remake to Robocop in these ones is a bit like Apple Mac to the original Apple Mac in the 80s. I mean, obviously technology has moved forward in a way that kind of works, that Robocop would be... But you're right, he doesn't. It's the joy of the original Robocop, of him actually looking like a robot and moving. I mean, I have to say, in this one, I don't feel like Peter Weller's as weighty in this one.
Maybe not.
As he is in the original one. He doesn't feel as... obviously, there's that great moment. And of course, it's the first one. It's the first time you see him, you don't see him. You just hear him go across, walking past. He's behind the screen, and he... chung, 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 which feels really heavy and like a machine. Whereas this one, I don't even know if he's playing it as well in this one. But it's like it's okay, and it's passable. It's passable as a sequel. I just think it should have been better. But that's not to say I don't have it on disc. I don't know how I actually have it on Blu-ray. I've got this one. I've got this on. It's just the DVD with. I bought the Arrow. The original one. The original one. I got that a while ago. Yeah, I've just got number 2 on this trilogy, which there's nothing on all the special features on here are for the first one, nothing for the second or the third one. I don't even know I've got the third one out of the box in this one. So.
No, I picked up the Scream Factory release from a few years ago, which is pretty good. Unlike that, it does actually have some features on it. It's got commentary and making ofs and stuff like that. I mean, there were lots of scenes that were filmed. Like at one point, Robo goes to the grave of Alex Murphy, and there's I think there's behind the scenes footage and there's stills of that, but the deleted scene itself, I don't know. They don't seem to be able to find any deleted footage. I mean, to be honest, I did read that Irving Kirschner was kind of cutting stuff out as they were filming, so they'd get to a scene and they'd go, no, that'll end up on the cutting room floor, so we won't even bother filming it. Rather than just filming it and then cutting it out later, he was editing as they filmed, basically, by choosing what was and wasn't going to be in there. But there's a gallery of stuff from deleted scenes. But no, if you are a fan of it, then that is the version to get. Obviously, it's from the US and it's Scream Factory, so it's only Region A. And they did release Robocop 3 as well in a similar package. if you're a fan of that, which obviously is on my shelf, of course.
Yeah, so like I said before, it's for me, unfortunately, it's not as good as the first one at all. It's okay, and there's we didn't really mention much of the other cast. There is some good people. There's a few people that come over from the original one, of course. The old man, I mean, he's still great in this one. He's kind of a little bit shiftier than the first one, of course. There is a great moment at the end with him. I think he's so nasty.
Yeah.
What he does at the end is just like, all right, you little which is a great moment. So that's kind of the end of our month of sequels. We might do another one because there are some other great sequels. I was thinking while we were doing this of other sequels that we could cover. So maybe we could do a sequel to the month of sequels. That would be perfect, wouldn't it? That would be good. So that was Robocop 2. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, let us know in the comments below.
Hit the subscribe button over there and don't forget to push the bell for notifications. There's other videos to check out over here. Come and find us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And join us next week for another video.